between family background and access to higher education is a robust empirical finding across many countries, but yet there is a debate about whether the relationship between family background and access to higher education is mostly predetermined at an early age or can be mediated through investment in schooling. So Cornelio and Heckman argued that long-run factors shape ability and expectations early on, and therefore emphasize the importance of early childhood investment. And Kruger contends that the return to human capital investment remains high even beyond adolescence, and especially for those from less advantaged family backgrounds. So the main questions are how important is age, and can the relationship between family background and access to higher education be influenced by the timing of educational transitions in secondary school. This paper exploits a unique educational reform in Romania, which postponed when students were tracked into academic and vocational schools in order to examine whether such later tracking improves access to higher education among socio-economically disadvantaged children. So the Romanian educational reform occurred in 1973, and it prevented students from entering vocational schools after only 8 years of schooling, and also required them to receive an additional 2 years of academic curriculum. Here you can see the structure of education in Romania before 1973 and after 1973. Due to this policy change, students born after January 1, 1959 were more likely to complete an academic high school curriculum as compared to their counterparts who were born immediately before this date. Here we can see the change in lithium enrollment by main specialty from 1973-74 to 1976-77, and this figure shows that the largest increase in lithium enrollment was in the somewhat less selective industrial high schools. Here we can see enrollment in vocational schools and apprenticeships by school year, and this figure shows the large decline in the number of students enrolled in vocational schools, enrolled in vocational schools, and on-the-job apprenticeship between the school years 73, 74 and 75, 76. Here we can see enrollment in lithiums by school year, and enrollment in lithiums increased sharply, and at the same time number of teachers in vocational schools fell, and number of teachers in lithiums increased also. This figure shows us an educational attainment for all individuals by birth cohort, and this figure shows the highest educational attainment by year of birth for individuals from the Romanian census of 1992, and here we can see that there is a sharp decline in the proportion of individuals with vocational training. Here it is. And between 1958 and 1959, and at the same time here we observe a sharp increase in the proportion of individuals who complete the first level and second level, so general 9 and 10 grades and general 11 and 12. Here we can see increase. And no such discontinuity is observed for the proportion completing only lower primary or those completing university. The primary data set for the empirical analysis combines two independent random samples from the 1992 Romanian census. This includes a 50% sample from the Population Activities Unit of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe and a 10% sample for IPUNS International. Authors have verified that these two samples are two separate random draws for the universe of all responses. Here we can see the descriptive statistics, and this table presents summary statistics for the full sample used in this study. So it means all individuals in cohorts born between 1956 and 1961. And we can observe that approximately 27% complete vocational training, 4% complete 9th and 10th grade in the first level of lyceum, 27% completed the second level, grades 11 and 12, and over 9% of over 9% graduated from the university, and only 1% of students completed post-secondary training. So summing the last three categories, we determined that almost 38% of students were eligible by law to apply for entrance into university, and 72% of sample is rural born, and finally parental education is very low. Mother primary education 64% and father primary education 50%. They have only primary education or no education at all. Authors took advantage of the 1973 educational reform in order to estimate the effect of post-voting tracking. Since this reform went into effect during the 1974 and 75 school years, and students enter grade 1 in September, after the calendar year in which they reached 6 years of age, those individuals born January 1, 1959 were unaffected by the policy, while those born after this date had their tracking postponed. So, with the detailed information of date of birth, authors estimated the impact of this policy using a regression discontinuity design. So, firstly, they examined the effect of the 1973 educational reform on educational attainment. Primary educational outcomes include eligibility to apply to university and university graduation. So here we can see the following regression equation, where XY includes fixed effects for calendar month of birth to control for seasonal differences between individuals born in different months. After I is equal to 1 if individual I was born on or after January 1, 1959, and 0 if this individual was born on or before December 31, 1958. So finally, F is a function of date of birth, which is the forcing variable in this context. And later they examined how the 1973 educational reform changed the composition of students from certain social classes who were eligible to apply to university or who graduated from university. Here we can see the following regression model, where social class is one of 5 markers of social class based on personal and parental backgrounds, characteristics, I, rural or urban place of birth, double I, born in poor region, I, born in poor region in rural, 3I. Rural locality, and also mother has only primary education or less, and father has only primary education or less. And now I would like to speak about results. So here we can see the effect of the reform on educational attainment. This table provides a precise estimate for the impact of the reform on several different education outcomes corresponding to the equation, to the first equation. From the preceding section. The row shows the coefficient on after using alternative polynomial trends. The first column indicates that children born after January 1959 were between 7 and 10 percentage points less likely to receive a vocational education. Given that the base probability of receiving a vocational education during this period was 0.27, and this represents an extremely large effect. The second and the third columns The second and the third columns reveal that students who were shifted out of vocational shocks ended up completing their education in academical schools instead. And the larger increase was among students who completed grades 11 and 12 and thereby became eligible to apply at university. But on the other hand, the fourth and the fifth column indicate that the 1973 reform had only a small effect on post-secondary educational attainment and virtually no effect on university graduation. This figure plots the proportion of individuals eligible for university and proportion of individuals graduating from university by month and week of birth. And as expected, panel A and panel C, eligible for university, show an extremely sharp discontinuity after January 59. For those eligible for university. Individuals born merely 2 weeks apart had very different likelihoods of being eligible for university, and no such discontinuity can be observed on the other two panels. Table 3 presents regression result from the sample of students eligible to apply for university corresponding to the second equation. From the previous section. So the first column indicates that the 1973 reform increased the proportion of eligible students who were born in rural region by approximately 4 percentage points. Second column shows that the proportion of eligible students who were born in a poor region increased by over 2 percentage points. And the third column reveals that the proportion of eligible students who are born in poor and rural regions increased by almost 3 percentage points, or 10% of the mean. Columns 4 and 5 display the effect of the proportion of eligible students whose mother and father had a minimum level of education. This figure also reveals a sharp discontinuous jump in the proportion of eligible students who come from poor and disadvantaged backgrounds according to all 5 markers of social class. You can see born rural, born in poor region, born rural and poor region, and mother and father primary school. I will speak about conclusion. Whether the relationship between family background and access to higher education can be influenced by the timing of educational transitions in secondary schools, it is a very important question for human capital policy. This paper examines an educational reform in Romania which postponed the timing of tracking into academic and vocational schools. So as a result, the proportion of students who became eligible to apply to university increased sharply, even while the number of university slots remained unchanged. So, using data from the Romanian census, the authors show that students from poor and disadvantaged groups were affected more by this reform. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions? No. Okay, so we finished a bit late, but not too bad. So we've got time to do this very American and English and Anglo-Saxon thing, give me the prize. So the prize is, I'm afraid, not very exciting. And so it's like a certificate printed on very cheap paper. And it's good because you can put it on the CV. And the prize is for the best of the presentations. So I've seen them all, and the winner is, on this not very well written, is Carlotta Moiser. Very good. Come here. Somebody take a picture. Work, you can keep that.
Okay.
Put that on the.
What is it? Sorry. Where I have to push?
That one.
Here.
That one.
Thank you.
Done?
No.
Has anybody got? Oh, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't go. Why?
You want it?
It doesn't go.
Why is it not working?